Good evening. This is Rich from Bike New York. Welcome to our bike commuting class. We are waiting for more people to join. We'll get started in about 5 minutes, so bear with us, please. Once again, we'll get started at about 6:05. I'm hoping a few people will join us late. If not, we'll start at 6:05 and let latecomers come in as they come in. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening. My name is Rich Conroy. I am the Director of Education at Bike New York, and we only have 2 people on our class tonight out of 9 registered, so it was a small group to begin with. I am going to, it looks like you have the option to unmute yourselves. If you have a question as we're going through our slide deck, you can just unmute yourself and ask a question. You can put questions in chat and we'll get to them at the end of the class, or you can just ask questions at the end. So let's go ahead and just get started. So our topic for this evening's class is bike commuting. And I want to just sort of define what that is. A lot of people see bike commuting as mainly, if not solely, biking to work and back. And it certainly can be that. That's probably where most of their commuting mileage would be. But I define bike commuting as using a bike for any kind of transportation, grocery shopping, running errands, going to the doctor, whatever you need to do. But instead of using a vehicle or mass transportation or walking, you're using a bike to get there. So let's just keep that in mind, because it doesn't always or mainly need to be just biking to work. Going to visit friends, going out to dinner, going to a party, things like that. Bike New York is a New York City-based nonprofit organization whose mission is to promote cycling, getting more kids on bikes. To that end, we are best known for the 5-Borough Bike Tour and Bike Expo New York, two back-to-back events that are really kind of related to each other, usually the first weekend of May. Except for this year when COVID and the state stay-at-home order prevented us from having that tour. We're also very well known nationally and even internationally for our innovative bike education programs for adults and youth, which in the last 3 years, we were humming on all cylinders, and we reached about 75,000 New Yorkers with free classes, programming like youth after school, youth summer program, school day programs with the New York City Department of Education. And those were, at actually a minimum of 1 hour contact per person, not just sort of giving somebody a safety pamphlet and having them walk off. This year, of course, we were much constrained by coronavirus to be able to offer that kind of programming. Most of our programming has been online this year. We created a virtual bike education resource hub. We created 16 videos about riding safely in traffic, and you might want to take a look at those. All right, let's move on. So tonight we're going to cover what kind of bike works well for bike commuting. We'll talk about how to carry stuff, which is an important part of using a bike for transportation. We will talk about what to wear, especially if you are going to the office and need to, not spend your workday wearing bike clothing. We will talk a little bit about street safety, although we have an entirely different class that talks about riding in traffic and being safe. And of course, we will talk about locking up your bike securely outside. So what kind of bike works best for bike commuting? I will say I've owned and still do own a wide variety of bikes, and I've used them all for bike commuting at one time or another. And probably the bike that you have right now will work just fine for most types of bike commuting. But I will say probably some bikes work better than others. And, I think a key ingredient is, are you physically comfortable on that bike? Is the bike easy to use, especially climbing hills or getting over some of New York City's very tall, like East River bridges? Can the bike carry stuff? To me, that's really important for bike commuting. And we'll have a whole section on carrying stuff. So you need to know, like if you are shopping for a bike, and I'm going to say right now, shopping for a bike is really, really tough. It just seems like in the United States, there is no inventory in the bike shops or with online retailers. And that's because COVID and coronavirus interrupted both production in China and Taiwan, where most of the world's bikes are made, but also interrupted transportation. I was on a website this evening for a pretty well-known Taiwanese manufacturer, KHS, who sells bikes in the United States. And every bike I clicked on, there was zero stock. And it looks like bikes are only going to be available maybe next spring. That said, you can check with your local bike shop. You can check with online retailers like Bikes Direct and see, like, if you do have your eyes on your favorite bike, when you'll be able to get your hands on that bike. You can also try Craigslist locally or eBay. You do have to know what you're doing if you're buying a used bike online, both in terms of assessing the condition of that bike, knowing whether or not the bike fits you, and whether or not the bike's going to work for you. So when choosing a bike for commuting, I would choose function first, and you need to ask yourself some questions like, how far do I need to ride? Because that may have a bearing on the type of bike you choose. A much longer commute might be more friendly with a lightweight road bike. A shorter commute, you could use a heavier city bike. How often do I want to commute? Do I need to haul stuff like a laptop, paperwork, changes of clothing, groceries, equipment, tools, things like that? Am I going to ride in bad weather? So do I need a bike that's really going to be more friendly for bad weather circumstances? Am I going to be locking my bike outside all day or all night where the entire public can see it and steal stuff off of it or try to steal it? And that's going to affect one's choice as well. So the main thing is you want to choose a bike that you're going to like, that fits you, feels comfortable, that you feel good about riding. One thing to keep in mind if you are buying a bike is that bikes get more expensive as they become lighter and as the quality of their parts and components, the frame, the main skeleton of the bike, and the wheels, as they get lighter and better quality, that just becomes more costly, just like anything. I used to work in a bike shop in pretty middle class area of Queens, and people would come in and, our least expensive adult bike was like $200, $250. And they were used to seeing the weekly ads in the newspaper from Kmart and Target and Walmart, where you could get a bike for $89. And they were wondering why our bikes were so much more expensive. And the simple answer is they were just way better parts, better quality, and of course, more professional assembly and maintenance in the bike shop. One thing to keep an eye on is certain categories of bikes. Maybe some manufacturers call them urban bikes or commuting bikes. They might come with certain features already installed that are considered commuter friendly, such as fenders or mud guards, a rack to help you haul your stuff, maybe some lights, built-in lights or attached lights for nighttime commuting. The key thing is, get a bike that fits you. If you were walking to work every day, you wouldn't go out and buy shoes that are way too big or way too small. That would just be horribly uncomfortable. And that's true of bicycles as well. So if you're buying a new bike, and even oftentimes older bikes, you can look up the manufacturer of that bike and they will have a sizing chart. And the key thing to know about the sizing chart is what's called standover height. And that is 1 to 2 inches less than your inseam measurement, if you know how to measure your inseam. And so, for example, a bike like this, the standover height would be the measurement from the ground to this top tube right here. That's the standover, and then you'd want 1 or 2 inches extra clearance between your body and that top tube. So one type of bike that I think works well for general commuting is a basic mountain bike. And when I say basic, I mean it has a hardtail frame. It's not dual suspension. So this is a hardtail, it's just a basic mountain bike frame. It does have front suspension, which can be a little more complicated, a little heavier. You may or may not like that. Older used mountain bikes from, say, the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, oftentimes won't have this front suspension because that's when kind of front suspension came in and became popular. The thing about a basic mountain bike is they are rugged, they are durable. They often, unless it was made for racing, mountain bike racing, they often have the attaching points to mount at least a rear rack to carry stuff. They also have fatter tires, which help absorb shock on rough roads and less than smooth pavement. Now, you might consider what we call a road bike, and I have certainly done a lot of commuting with road racing bikes like this one here. Now, keep in mind, a road racing bike, uh, it's going to put you in a more aerodynamic position, which is bent over much further. A lot of people don't find that comfortable. These bikes are meant to either win races or ride extremely long distances without fatiguing the rider. So if you do have, say, a 20-mile one-way commute, like from the Hudson Valley, say Terrytown or Nyack, a road bike might not be a bad choice if you have that kind of distance to go. Keep in mind, they generally are not rack friendly, so you're not putting a rack on this. And even if you can, you have to keep the loads pretty light, like 10 pounds or less, because the frames are just, they get really flexy if you start, putting a 30 pack of beer back there for your commuting. A better type of road bike for commuting is a touring bike, or what are now a popular category, a relative of the touring bike, is they're called gravel bikes, and they're kind of meant to go off-road, but they're fine riding them on-road too. The thing about touring bikes and gravel bikes is they do have usually certainly touring bikes they'll have the attaching points for racks. These bikes are made to carry stuff. They'll have wider tires. So if you do have some gravel roads or an unpaved trail, you can take these bikes on those kinds of surfaces. They'll generally have very low gearing to get you up the hills. They'll give you a little bit more of an upright ride because they're not meant to win fast road races. The other thing about these road racing bikes is generally the fattest tire you're going to be able to put on one of these is 25 millimeters wide, and that's pretty skinny as tires go. You're just not putting a fat like hybrid tire or a touring tire on these racing bikes. And so, these thicker, wider, fatter tires help with stability and control. They also help absorb road shock a lot better. Now, there is a type of like pavement popular bike, a fixed gear or a single speed. The difference between a fixed gear and single speed is the single speed you can coast, like you can stop pedaling and the bike will roll along. The fixed gear, as long as that is when the back wheel is rolling, the crank and the chain is rotating as well. So when the bike's moving, you're pedaling whether you want to be or not. A lot of people like these because they're simple, they don't have a gear system to maintain, derailleurs to brake, things like that. However, they can be much more challenging in terms of riding them up steep hills. And there are steep hills in almost every borough of New York City. Now, another really popular type of bike for commuting is a hybrid. And it's called a hybrid because it has the same sort of wheel size and diameter as a road racing, especially a touring bike. So it will have wider tires on it, but it borrows the frame design and the parts mostly from the mountain bike world. So you can expect like a triple crank with really low gearing, mountain bike derailleurs, mountain bike handlebar style, mountain bike brakes, mountain bike shifters. So it's called a hybrid because it's a combination of the two. These are generally good all-around, all-purpose bikes. They give you a more upright ride. They have attaching points for racks so that you can make your bike carry stuff. And they'll probably be lighter weight than, say, a mountain bike with a suspension system on it. Now, in New York City and a lot of other cities, folding bikes are really popular for a lot of different reasons. And mainly they're more friendly for mass transportation. Like you can take a regular bike on Metro North or Long Island Railroad or New Jersey Transit, but there are rush hour restrictions on those full-size bikes. Whereas if you read the fine print about those train lines, bike rules, there are no restrictions for folding bikes. So that's one reason why they're popular. Also, you have some office buildings in Manhattan that kind of have attitudes about bikes. And, oh, you have to take your bike on the freight elevator, which closes at 4 o'clock. And there's all these kind of like anti-bike attitudes. But they tend to be more friendly towards folding bikes. And you can actually fold your bike up, throw it in a folding bike bag that just simply looks like a modest-sized piece of luggage, and roll it in using the regular passenger elevator, and nobody would be the wiser. And then a lot of people live in small apartments, so the smaller size of the folding bike, especially when it's folded up, is more friendly for apartment living. I actually have versions of both of these bikes here in my apartment, and I think they're really great especially for travel. This bike here, the Strida, is really cool, unusual design. I would not try to ride that thing a long distance though. It's single speed, it only has 2 seat positions, but it is a very cool design, and it folds down practically flat. All right, well, let's move on. And then if you don't want to own a bike, think about a bike share system. Now in New York City, that is City Bike, and there have been a couple of other companies that did pilots in other parts of New York City. But the cool thing about City Bike is that you don't have to own the bike. They are expanding. They're now in the Bronx. They're in Western Queens. They're in Western Brooklyn. And of course, all over Manhattan. I think Northern Staten Island now. You don't have to worry about maintenance. You don't have to worry about getting it into your apartment or your office building, nor would you want to, because they're very heavy. These bikes are really designed for short trips. I think you can use them for 30 to 45 minutes, depending on your membership. They're really meant for getting you from your apartment to a workplace or another site a couple miles away, where you have to go to different work sites during the day. You can hop on a City Bike. Or maybe if you're getting from, say, Penn Station to where your office is, that's why people use City Bike, is going that last mile of their commute. And it's pretty affordable. It's pretty affordable. So this is another way to go. And just make sure that your bike is equipped for legal commuting. If you live in New York State, your bike must have a white front light and a red rear light if you are riding after dusk. You must have a bell or a horn, which I will say is better for alerting pedestrians than it is for alerting drivers. You must have brakes on your wheels that will cause the wheels to stop. And New York State wants you, surprisingly enough, to have a seat on your bike. They want you to be comfortable, so please make sure your bike has a seat on it. Let's talk about carrying stuff. Whether you're going to work or running errands, you're always probably going to need to carry a lock. And then you might want to pick up some groceries or pick up stuff from various stores where you like to shop, anything that you can haul on a bike. So the most popular thing that people use to haul stuff is a backpack. They're everywhere. You can get them almost anywhere in New York City. They're pretty affordable. They work best with road racing bikes, but I have seen people kind of overdo it to the point where they're carrying what look to me like extremely large loads on their backs, commuting into work. And that's sort of defeating the purpose of maybe having a road racing bike, is having that much weight on your back. So you don't necessarily want to be carrying a ton of bricks on your back if you are a bricklayer. And the other thing that I've noticed about using a backpack when I commute is I get, a really sweaty back. And Of course, in the summertime, you're probably going to get sweaty anyway, but in the wintertime, I get a sweaty back with a backpack. My favorite device for hauling stuff is to attach a rack to the rear of my bike and to use panniers, which hang down from the sides of the rack. You can carry, especially with a stout mountain bike or stout touring bike, a pretty heavy load. I did my Thanksgiving shopping in 2 trips with 2 very full panniers, and it was heavy. But my touring bike hauled it with no flexing, no noodling. It just hauled it like it was made to haul it. Now, this combination, a rack and panniers, is probably not going to be cheap. You might be looking at $150, $250 for a good quality rack and set of panniers. So it's not cheap. But I really like to make my bike haul stuff, not my body. The other thing is you want to make sure your bike has the attaching points. So kind of just below the seat post on the frame, there should be 2 little holes, threaded holes for the front part of the rack here. And then down at the rear dropout, again, 2 little threaded holes where you can mount the bottom of the rack here. Now, if you are using a road bike, there are ways and there are types of racks that will attach to the brake bolt of the road bike and to the quick release, standard quick release of a road bike. And so you can kind of haul some stuff and attach a rack to a road racing bike if you want to. I've done it before. I actually have tried hauling a Thanksgiving dinner home from the grocery store with a road bike, and the thing flexed like crazy. They're not really made to do that. Another way to haul at least smaller loads, lighter loads, maybe a change of clothes, lunch, a 6-pack of beer, whatever, is what's called a seat post rack. So it attaches to your seat post. This one has little side panels because sometimes these trunk bags have little fold down panniers, fold out, zip out panniers. Or you might even be able to attach a very small pannier, like one from Delta, to the side of this. But you are not going to haul as much as you would with this combination. And if you do try to haul that much, your seat post rack is going to break right here. So it does have some advantages. A lot of times they're quick and easy to remove. They can act like a fender that prevents water and spray from going up your back. These are good for bikes that don't have attaching points for bikes. You might want to think about a front cargo basket. These are becoming popular for hybrids and cruiser bikes, beach cruisers, various kinds of city bikes, not the bike share city bike, which have a built-in basket. So there's 2 basic types. One sort of can attach either to the handlebar or the fork or both, which means that when you steer, this basket is going to steer with you. And that's probably the most common type. And the downside of that is if you are hauling something pretty heavy up there, like that 30-pack of beer, that's a lot of weight moving around and it's up high when you are steering. The other type attaches to the frame right here, the head tube, and it stays straight when you steer. So that's better for heavy loads if you can find a basket that's that big. If you are using a basket, please do use a cargo net or bungee cords to hold your load down, because if you do hit a bump, it can have a tendency to jump and pop into the air, especially if you hit a bump pretty hard. And I do like to be prepared, so some things I carry with me on my commute is a little seat wedge bag like this. And in that seat wedge bag, I keep a little multi-tool in case something comes loose or I need to make an adjustment. I carry a spare tube if I get a flat tire. I also carry a patch kit in case I use that bike for a longer trip that's not just bike commuting. I carry the tire levers to help me change a flat tire if I get one. And then I carry a frame mounted pump in case I get a flat and I need to inflate my replacement tube. I also carry, it doesn't show it, but I put little bottle cages on my frame, and most bike frames have mounting points for them so that you can put a water bottle or two on your bike. And you don't want to get dehydrated when you're riding around, running errands or going to work. All right, let's talk about clothing and what to wear. So we strongly recommend wearing a bike helmet, even if you are a skilled, safe, stable rider and you were using bike lanes or quiet streets, still things can happen. It is not a state law or a city law for teens over the age of 14 or adults to ride a bike. To wear a helmet. Helmets don't prevent crashes, which we think is the main bike safety strategy you need to have, is avoiding crashes, but they can mitigate and reduce injuries in the event that you do have a crash. And believe me, things can happen. Loose gravel, slick surfaces, wet leaves, things like that. Most crashes are caused by surface hazards like that. And you do want a helmet. That's the kind of crash that a helmet's designed to prevent head injuries from, is those falling off your bike caused by a surface hazard type situation. So what should you wear when you're going out biking? If it's just a short little trip, maybe using city bike, couple miles, 3 miles, you can just wear regular clothing. We do recommend closed-toed, flat-soled shoes. We have seen people riding in heels, sandals, flip-flops, things like that. I mean, you can do that, but it's not the most safe or secure thing. If you need to wear heels or, nicer dress shoes in the office, you can always keep a pair of those things in the office or throw them in your backpack and do a quick change when you get to your office or your party or wherever you're going. If you are wearing long pant legs, you want to keep those out of the chain. And the way to do that is to just roll up your right pant leg, or you can get a strap. I've even used, big rubber bands, really big ones, just to keep my pant legs out of the chain. So you totally can wear regular clothing while riding a bike. Now, if you are going if I was riding a bike longer than say 3 miles, I would really start thinking about, for myself at least, some biking gear, biking clothing. They're just made to make you more comfortable when you are on a longer ride. They're cut differently because, on a bike, your position is a little bit different from just sitting around the house. So like a cycling jacket is cut differently for the cycling position than, say, a regular jacket. If you're, going for a much longer ride, like all over the city or something, you might want to think about bike shorts. These have, padded crotches to help you with saddle soreness and chafing. Technical jerseys they wick away sweat, and they also have pockets in the back for like your cell phone, your keys, your wallet, things like that wouldn't work real well to carry, say, in a front jacket pocket. Now, if you are riding at night, please do make sure you are visible. We already mentioned lights, but it's a good idea to add some retro reflective gear. A lot of bike clothing or athletic clothing, jackets, biking shoes, running shoes already have like little bits of reflective gear, reflective striping on them. You can purchase from a variety of sources reflective vests. I know Harbor Freight, which the tool sales company carries these. Companies where construction workers have to buy safety vests will sell this stuff. And it is really super visible at night if you're not like covering it up with a backpack or something. Now, if you're riding in rain, and this is one of my least favorite types of riding, and I generally avoid it, but if you are, you can purchase rain jackets, rain pants to help keep you dry. And here's where you probably want to spend some money. If you're riding any kind of distance, more than a mile or two, you're going to start getting sweaty. And a lot of these rain outfits, rain clothing, don't breathe all that well. And so you're getting as wet inside these from sweating as you would from just going out and riding in the rain. So probably the best brand is a type of material called Gore-Tex, which does wick body moisture to the outside of the rain jacket or the rain pants. The thing is, Gore-Tex is pretty expensive. If I'm riding in rain, you might want to wear some waterproof boots, or there are special shoe covers, but waterproof boots are probably just much less expensive than these shoe covers. You can also make sure that your bike has fenders, chain guards, things like that to help keep your shoes, your clothing cleaner and drier than if you don't have those things. If you're riding a bike without fenders in the rain, that rear tire's kicking up a spray of dirty road stuff right up to onto your back and even onto your helmet or the back of your hair. So fenders are always a good idea. Let's talk about cold weather gear. And so some things you might want to think about. I always want to keep my head warm, my ears, my chin, my neck. So I wear what's called a balaclava, which I find those to be pretty warm and comfortable. I like to keep my nose and my mouth clear, just because I'm fogging up my glasses while I'm riding if my mouth is covered. Of course, during COVID, you might want to think about covering your mouth while you're biking, also covering your face. Some people wear helmet covers. I don't. I use a balaclava. If it is snowing or we're having a nor'easter, I might add ski goggles, which you can get from any ski shop or sporting goods store in New York City. Now, dressing your body, you want a base layer that's not cotton. It should be lightweight, technical fabric that wicks sweat and moisture away from your body. Even if it's cold, once you start riding and exerting yourself, you are going to sweat. And I've arrived at the office in December, January, February, those really cold months, inside all of my layers, sweating like it's a summer day. I like to keep my legs covered with a base layer and maybe one outer layer if it's not raining. And then in terms of shoes, you can wear like insulated hiking boots. You can wear insulated rain boots. I do wear cycling shoes, but I have a pair that are winter specific. So they have that nice Gore-Tex insulation in them. The main thing is you don't want cotton against your skin. If you have to stop while you're outside, like say for a flat tire, or you're going to the New Year's Eve celebration in Times Square, you don't want to ride 10 miles and get that cotton t-shirt all sweaty. And then all of a sudden you're standing outside and that cold, wet garment is next to your skin. It starts to get cold. You can actually get hypothermia that way. Then I add on some wool socks underneath my winter shoes. I use either leather gloves with a nice glove liner inside, or I use mittens that have a wool liner, and then I think it's a leather outer mitten. And the mittens are really warm. They keep your fingers together, and I found that's the best combination. And the bike controls, like your brake levers, your shifters, you'll still be able to handle those and manipulate them even with mittens on. So I like to keep a couple changes of clothes in the office, and I cycle those in and out every week. Take them home, they get thrown in the laundry, bring fresh clothes in, maybe on a Monday. I keep a bike lock at work, so I don't have to haul that heavy lock back and forth every day. Then I keep a lock at home for just like running errands. So I have like 2 different locks, but I don't run that stuff back and forth every day. When I get to work, I've been, my commute is about 7-8 miles. We have a bike room that we put into our office building with the building permission. So check with your building, see if they have indoor bike parking. Otherwise, you might use a parking garage nearby or lock up out on the street. When I get to the office, I grab my change of clothes, my office shoes, and I run into the restroom and just do a quick change. I don't worry too much about showering, even on a hot day. If you shower in the morning before you leave, just sweating some is not going to make you smell terrible the rest of the day. That said, I do keep a little toiletries kit with a hairbrush, toothbrush, a little bit of deodorant, just to freshen up a bit once I get to the office. If your building doesn't have showers and you do really want to freshen up, you can get some, I think there are adult like cleaning wipes so that you don't smell like a baby by using baby wipes instead, but I guess you could do that too. All right, let's talk about your route and getting there. So if you are living in the New York City area, we do recommend that you get your hands on the latest New York City Department of Transportation bike map. They do have a 2020 version. They put one out every year, a new version. I think you can call 311 to get one, or you can go to your closest bike shop, usually has these bike maps, and they're free. They're your tax dollars at work. Now, the bike maps are going to tell you where the off-street Parks Department paths are. They'll tell you which routes have separated bike paths that are physically separated from traffic, even though they are still on the street. And then which routes have bike lanes that are not separated. They're just kind of like next to the parked cars. So the New York City bike map is a good planning tool, route planning tool. So this is an example of an off-street bike path. They're also called multi-use trails or greenways. So they're nice to ride on. This is the Hudson River Greenway. It's the busiest bike path in the United States, but they can also be challenging. There's a lot of dog walkers, people just walking 2, 3, 4 abreast, people jogging. Just because you don't have cars there doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own safety issues. So you do have to still be alert, be ready to stop, give other people lots of space just in case something sudden happens. I've had kids come out of nowhere. I've had runners do U-turns without checking right in front of me. So yeah, you do have to have your wits about you when you're using these. This is an example of what's called a protected bike lane. You'll see it is on the street. usually separated by parked cars. These usually feel pretty comfortable, and you can see this one has a buffer zone between the cars so that you're not too close to the opening car doors. Now, I have seen some pretty tight separated bike lanes, like in the East Village, where they really don't have this buffer zone here. There's another one that's on West 50, I want to say West 55th or something like that, that is pretty tight. I'm less comfortable in those because you have the curb here and a car door kind of like right here. This is an example of a two-way separated bike lane. Kent Avenue, Vernon Boulevard, Kent Avenue in Brooklyn, Vernon Boulevard in Queens are examples of two-way separated bike lanes. So really, you're supposed to go in the direction of traffic, like this cyclist is, with that arrow. If you have a separated bike lane, you're not supposed to be riding counterflow. This is the only situation where you can see this is striped so that the cyclists can ride against the flow of traffic, but they're separated from traffic, mostly. The area where you're not separated from traffic, where you do have to kind of like be alert, is when you come to intersections, particularly intersections where traffic can make a left turn across the bike lane. And then this is an example of a bike lane that is not separated from traffic. These are usually on the left side in New York City because you're less likely to get doored on the passenger side. And also, if this is a bus route, you're less likely to be interfering or tangling up with the buses, letting passengers on and off on the right side. Now, this is an example of what's called a sharrow. It's not actually a bike lane. It's really one, it tells motorists that this is a bike route. It's a popular route for cyclists and to be aware. But it's also telling the bicyclists, usually, if it's done right, this is where you should be riding on this type of street. So these sharrows should be at least 4 feet away from the parked cars so that you're not riding in the door zone. And then finally, don't ever let anybody tell you that you belong in the bike lane, especially if you're riding on the street where there is no bike lane. Generally in New York, New York City, New York State, all 50 states, any road or street is a legal place for a cyclist to ride their bike. And if it's not, it's probably an interstate highway, a parkway, or some very high speed, high traffic road that's going to be signed and marked, no bikes. But of the thousands and thousands of miles of roads and streets in New York City, virtually all of those miles are legal for cyclists to ride on, even if they don't have a bike lane. Now, if you are on a street with a bike lane, you are supposed to use that bike lane unless it's blocked for some reason, like with a double parked vehicle. If it's unsafe to use, like maybe there's pedestrians walking around in it, like through this Times Square area on 8th Avenue. If you need to make a turn at the intersection or go over this building on this side, you can scan, signal, and move over and ride on this side to get to your turn at the intersection or get to this entrance to this building over here. So there are valid legal reasons for cyclists to not ride in the bike lane. So the main thing is to plan your route in a way that is comfortable for you. And it can be kind of challenging in New York City. New York, like other eastern cities, are older cities where they were not necessarily great at urban planning. And so you have kind of like these mishmash of streets that used to be little towns, kind of created and designed their own streets until it became one large conglomeration called New York City. It's easy in Manhattan, which has mostly a street grid that is north-south and east-west. The Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island are not necessarily like that. But what I try to do is find quieter, less busy side streets that go through. I might have to make a few more turns. I might have to go a little bit out of my way, which is okay. My bike's got wheels and it's fun to ride. But I really try to avoid being on those high speed, high traffic roads like Northern Boulevard in Queens, or Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn, or Highland Boulevard in Staten Island, just because they're not fun to ride on. It's like riding on a racetrack. So do plan your route using the bike lane resources that the city has, but also looking at quieter side streets and less traveled roads. And this might take some experimentation if you want to get to the same place every day, is which route is going to be the most comfortable, the least stress for you to get there. So of course, we already mentioned the New York City bike map. Google Maps has a feature in its directions that you can turn on that does bicycle route planning for you if you have a specific place you're going in mind. Google Maps, you can also turn on a feature that shows the bike lanes, bike paths, and bike routes that are, officially part of our bike network. I have not used these other two, Ride the City or Hop Stop. I have used Map My Ride. I think Ride with GPS is another one that I use. Those are apps for smartphones. So when you are riding out there, just keeping an eye on the clock here, please do obey traffic laws. New York State and New York City traffic laws do apply to bicyclists. And don't base your bicycling decisions based on what you see other cyclists doing in terms of traffic laws. You can get a ticket running red lights, riding the wrong way, riding on the sidewalk. You can collide with other people doing those things. Riding without lights at night is another big one. And it makes the city like a less friendly place for other people who are not riding a bike when the cyclists are breaking traffic laws. And those of us who ride know that cycling is a great thing. We think it's a great thing for the city, but we want to make cycling a good experience for people who are not riding a bike. So please do obey traffic laws, even if it's not necessarily the most convenient thing to do. So yes, be following the law, ride predictably, which means one, following traffic law, not riding facing traffic. Riding in a straight, continuous line, not weaving in and out of parked cars. Be visible, which may mean riding in the center of the traffic lane as you, especially as you ride towards an intersection. Riding in the center of the traffic lane makes you more visible to oncoming traffic. People at that intersection may be trying to cross or enter the street. And it also prevents people from cutting you off, maybe passing you and then cutting you off immediately. Think ahead. If you see a double parked vehicle in front of you off in the distance, don't wait until the last second when you're right behind it to suddenly swerve around it. A good example of thinking ahead is you scan over your shoulder to see if somebody's about to pass you. As you see that double parked vehicle, you use your left turn signal indicating you're moving to the left to go around it. You scan again. If the coast is clear and nobody's about to pass you, you can move out to go around that double parked vehicle. And I got to tell you, almost every block in New York City, you're going to have to use that skill or technique because people just use the traffic lane as parking spots everywhere in New York City. And it's kind of a danger of cyclists, but that's how to handle it is, prepare, think ahead, scan for traffic behind you, signal that you're moving over, scan again, go around it when the coast is clear. And then you want to ride ready. So make sure that your lights have batteries that are charged up. Make sure that your helmet is with you, that you're bringing any gear for cold or wet weather. Make sure that your water bottle's full, and make sure that your bike is in good mechanical condition by doing what's called an ABC quick check inspection. We already mentioned some of the traffic laws, but the key ones are stop at red lights. You have to, in New York City and New York State, stop and stay stopped. Now, in New York City, we have a new law that says when the little pedestrian signal turns to the white pedestrian walking person, like that white color, you can go on the pedestrian signal before the light turns green. Otherwise, you have to stay stopped. With a stop sign, you have to stop. You have to scan for traffic coming along the cross street. When the coast is clear, you can go. It is against the law to ride a bike on the sidewalk in New York City. Yes, there are not supposed to be cars there, but riding a bike on the sidewalk is not safer, and it really irritates pedestrians. And really, in reality, sooner or later, most sidewalks are going to have cars on them where they come out of parking garages or driveways. So it's not true that there are no cars on the sidewalk. All right, let's move on. One thing about being predictable is communicating with motorists. I already mentioned using hand signals. And I found that I get a lot more courtesy and slack from motorists if I use hand signals to tell motorists what I need to do next or I'm about to do next. Now, these are the authorized hand signals in New York State. So this is a left turn, or I'm changing lanes to the left. This is a right turn, or I'm changing lanes to the right. This is kind of old school. Motorcyclists are still taught this, but it was really developed and used for when cars did not have electric turn signals. This is an easier right turn signal to understand. It's just your right arm straight out. And then this is I am slowing or I am stopping. And I've used this one when somebody comes up behind me really fast and is kind of like tailgating me. I just put my hand out. Motorists understand that means you're slowing down or stopping, and it causes them to apply the brakes even if you don't. A big one about predictability and visibility is when you are approaching an intersection where vehicles can make a right turn, please do not pass them and overtake them on the right, especially if it's a large vehicle like a bus or a truck, because when they do start to turn, the cyclist is trapped and has nowhere to go but underneath that vehicle. If it's a two-way street, pass on the left side or take the lane as you come into or approach an intersection. That vehicle in front of you is starting to turn, or if you don't know, if you were taking the lane, it makes it easy to pass around them on their left side. Always pass slower traffic on the left, assuming it's a two-way street. If it's one of the avenues on Manhattan, the big one-way avenues with multiple lanes, you pass turning traffic on the inside lanes, not on the outside lanes. We already mentioned a little bit about visibility in terms of lights and reflective gear. But visibility is also about where you position yourself on the street or the road. And I mentioned this in the last slide is, if you are following a larger vehicle, don't follow close behind. Take the lane, ride further back, even ride a little bit off to the left of that large vehicle. If there is oncoming traffic, they can see you better, especially if they need to make a left turn. All ride. We kind of covered this. A big important thing is to not ride right next to parked cars, riding in what's called the door zone. The rule of thumb here is you want to ride, excuse me, at least 4 to 5 feet away from parked cars. In New York City, with all the parallel parking, sooner or later, if you ride a lot, a car door is going to open up on you. And it comes as a total surprise. It can even be terrifying. I've had it happen to me a number of times, but I've never been hit by a car door that swings open suddenly, because I ride far enough out where it's just not going to hit me, and I don't need to make a wild swerving maneuver to avoid it. So riding readies means, you do an ABC quick check. We do have a video on how to do that on our website. Keep your tires inflated. They'll probably lose about half their air in the space of a week. Clean and lube your chain, especially if you were riding in snowy, icy, rainy, salty, sandy weather that wintertime brings us. All right, we're about to wrap up here. Let's talk about bike security. This is a big problem in New York City. So how to lock your bike up and where to park it. So the best thing to do is use a bike rack, and New York City is installing some of these around the city. I don't think they're installing enough, especially since they took out most of the parking meters in the business districts. So you can use bike racks. Some of the benches, the street furniture, also you'll notice they have little loops on the end of them. Those loops are actually places to lock up your bike, believe it or not. A lot of people don't realize that, but they're actually kind of a built-in bike rack, especially the newer, more modern park benches. You can lock up to the few remaining parking meters that are out there. You can lock up to signposts, like the no parking signs and other kinds of signs. If you have a big chain, you can lock up maybe to a lamp post or a telephone pole. Let's see. It is against the law to lock up to the stair railings for the subway stops. I would not lock up to a signpost for a bus stop, because that often interferes with boarding and unboarding the buses. It is against the law to lock up to a tree, so please don't do that. If you are locking to scaffolding, lock to the vertical part of the scaffolding and not the horizontal part. Anybody with a $3 adjustable wrench from a 99-cent store can unbolt the horizontal bars in a minute or two of scaffolding without really compromising the scaffolding all that much. So if you are locking up to a scaffolding, lock up to the vertical part, which is heavy and impossible for somebody to lift. Now, when you are locking up, please make sure you're locking your frame to the bike rack or the pole. You sometimes see bikes, wheels that are just locked up to something. It's because somebody locked up the wheel, and anybody with a knowledge of how a bike quick release works or that $3 wrench could just remove the rest of the bike from the wheel and figure out another way to steal a wheel, which would probably be the next bike over where somebody locked the frame and not the wheel. So the best locks to use are these heavy U-locks or the really, really heavy chain locks. If I am using a U-lock, I combine that with a cable so that I can loop the cable around both of my wheels and attach it to the U-lock so that both my wheels and the frame are secured to whatever I'm locking up to. There are devices that you can get at a bike shop. Pinhead is one company. Kryptonite is another company. They are little locking devices for your wheels, your seat post, and I've even seen stem locking devices so that somebody with a $3 Allen wrench doesn't steal your entire handlebar assembly. That handlebar assembly is expensive with the shifters and the brake levers. That can be a couple $100 right there. So these locking devices, Pinhead, Kryptonite, I'm trying to think who else makes them. You can find them at a bike shop. They make it impossible or extremely difficult for somebody with a common hand tool to just walk up and steal parts off of your bike if you're locked up all day. Outside, that is. Another strategy people use is they'll use a good lock and then they just kind of have a bike that looks beat up. Maybe it has a heart of gold in terms of a good frame and good wheels, but it's scratched up, it's covered with stickers, it doesn't look attractive, but it gets you around and does its job. So that's another strategy if you don't want to lose a nice bike, is to not lock up all day or all night with a bike that looks really nice. Don't use a cable by itself. There are cable locks out there, or cable padlocks. Cable's very easy to cut, so I am always locking up the frame with a U-lock and using the cable to secure the wheels. It still leaves my wheels a little bit vulnerable. If you do have things attached to your bike, like computer, lights, seat bag with tools, you know, and you're going to be inside somewhere, you might want to take that stuff with you. It can cost you a few bucks to replace those things, way more than a few bucks. Oh, this is an example of a Pinhead device. So it replaces the quick release skewer for your wheel. It has a special key that only you have. If you do need to make sure that you need to take your wheel off for a flat tire, keep that little key with you. It's actually part of the key chain for the rest of like your house and office keys. If you get a flat tire, the bike shop can't really help you if you have this locking device on your wheel. Some people put a bike chain or a bike chain wrapped in an inner tube between their frame and the seat rails so that people don't just flip open a quick release lever and steal their seat. I've had a seat stolen. Another device you can use is just get rid of the quick release lever and use a standard seat collar that requires an Allen wrench to open and close. These quick release levers for the seat post make it really easy to steal seat posts and seats. And that's, you go to a bike shop to replace that stuff, that's 75 bucks right there. All right, let's talk about using your bikes with mass transit. I think this is our last unit here. Now, you can get your bike on the subway 24/7. It's easier to do that if you are getting your bike on the subway at the beginning of that subway's route rather than in the middle of it. I've tried to get bikes on the D train at 125th during the evening rush hour, and the subway cars are just packed, and that's not happening. If you do get your bike on the subway, please use the ends of the subway car where you'll be out of the way of the doors rather than the middle of the subway car. And I believe MTA has some rules about which cars you're supposed to use. I think they want you to use the front and rear car. Those will also be the ones that are least crowded, but nobody really enforces that rule too much. If you are using any of the other cars, please use the ends of the subway car, not the middle. And using the subway is great, you know, if you're not feeling well, if you just don't, if you live in South Brooklyn, you need to go to the North Bronx and you don't want to do all those urban miles, you can cut part of that out by using the subway. If you were coming from outside the city, some of our train stations do have bike lockers. I think all of them have bike racks. You have to contact your train service provider, whether it's New Jersey Transit, Long Island Railroad, I think, if you want to use one of these bike lockers. Just do read the fine print. If you're taking your bike on any of these transit services, please read their bike rules. I think their rules try to be pretty generous, but they do have rush hour and even some holiday restrictions, like for our busiest holidays. So like, you're not getting a bike on the Montauk line the day before Thanksgiving. It's just not going to happen. You know, the day before 4th of July. Even Metro North has certain Sunday trains inbound in the middle of the afternoon where you're not supposed to put a bike on the train just because the trains get so busy and crowded. Please be aware that you do need a bike pass. It's $5, but it is good for a lifetime unless you lose it. You need a bike pass for Metro North Railroad and Long Island Railroad. And I just keep my bike pass in my wallet. They hardly ever ask for it, but sometimes they do. You do not need a bike pass for New Jersey Transit or PATH. Some of our buses that go outside of the city do allow even unboxed bikes in the cargo bay of the bus. Just check the website for the bike rules on different bus lines and whether or not they're going to charge you a nominal fee. Same with our ferries. I believe the New York City ferries do allow bikes, but they charge you a nominal fee to put a bike on. Okay, I'm not going to go through this. Now, it's really hard to get your bike through the turnstiles of the subway system. What I do is I usually park it right next to the emergency door or it's the wheelchair access door. I swipe my card through the turnstile, I go through, I turn around, I open that emergency gate, which can usually be opened from the inside. And then I just roll my bike in. You know, I think it used to be that those gates could only be opened if the desk agent saw you and pressed the button to open it. But now I think all of them can be opened from the inside. I haven't seen one recently where I had to have the desk agent help me. And that's it. This is, I hope this has been helpful in terms of some commuter-friendly tips. I'm going to stop the screen share, but if you have questions about specific slides, we can come back to those. And let's see, let's open it up for questions. So I think everybody can unmute themselves. If you want to ask a question verbally, you have to unmute yourself first. Miles has he uses a tire tube to secure his seat post. That's great, but you can cut those pretty easily with a scissors. So somebody has a question?
Just a quick question about locking it up to scaffolding. Isn't like scaffolding considered private property? I mean, I once saw a situation where a building took their scaffolding down, and usually it takes them only like a couple hours to do that. And they took it down and the bike was just sitting there right on the street and the scaffolding was removed, and it was a horrible sight to see, but I hope the person got their bike back.
Yeah, I think it actually takes longer to take scaffolding down. I mean, most of that scaffolding is kind of tall. And I mean, a lot of people use it, and some of the scaffoldings just kind of become semi-permanent. So you do have to be aware, it's private property. Usually the scaffolding company is not sitting there monitoring it, whether people are locking their bikes up. Near me, I have a apartment building that they just complete much of the construction work. And they took the scaffolding down. It took them like 3 days to take it down. But, you know, something like that, I'd be like, hey, you know, this building's looking like it's getting done. I should not park my bike there all day, maybe every day. Or I should keep an eye out for scaffolding that's starting to disappear. And then there's telltale signs that's happening, like a truck loaded with pipes and boards and other pieces of scaffolding, and people climbing around on the scaffolding, unbolting it. But your point about private property is an important one, particularly private apartment buildings. If they have a decorative railing that is separating the sidewalk from maybe some landscaping, a lot of them don't like people locking up to that. You know, they try to keep it painted and keep it nice looking. If it has an awning at the entrance that's held up with poles, they don't like people locking up to that. Some places will put signage up, but really don't lock up to private property. With a really long chain, you can lock up to light poles. Sometimes telephone poles or light poles have a really heavy, thick, difficult to cut, and people would not really cut these things because it's going to make the pole fall over, but it's a cable that braces it. I've locked up to those things. Usually I use parking meters, bike racks, and signposts, the no parking signs, stop signs, street signs, things like that. So the question here is, have neighborhoods in the city you might recommend for beginners to get familiar with biking in traffic safely, especially Queens, Manhattan? So I would just say, you know, find the quieter streets in your neighborhood, or find the quieter times, like, you know, early morning, Saturday and Sunday in particular are going to be quieter times. Now, there are some neighborhoods that are super quiet. On Point Bronx in the South Bronx is very quiet, but you know, you have to get yourself up there, and if you live in Staten Island or South Brooklyn, going to Hudson Point is really not all that convenient. But you know, use one-way side streets that have less traffic on them, and then follow some of the tips and advice that I gave you.
And just to kind of continue on what you said about hand signals earlier, I find also if a driver like does the right thing, they let you merge in, you know, acknowledging them, giving them a thumbs up, or putting up your hand, kind of like saying thank you for letting me merge. And I think you know, it kind of gives a good vibe, and sometimes it goes a long way.
Yeah, you can do that. You know, give a wave, give a peace sign. I'm usually like focused on what's going on. I live in the Bronx, and I often have to go north-south, and there aren't very many good north-south routes that are not busy. And just because the Bronx is such a north-south place, so I'm like paying attention to the next pothole, manhole cover, steel plate, double car that's coming up in my path. You have other questions about bike commuting? All right, well, that sound of silence usually means people don't have any more questions. You should be getting a follow-up email from one of my coworkers, Sean Tall, with a recording of this class that will have the slide deck, the questions and comments. And I think she will include some other resources that we have from our website, like possibly some of the videos. Please do keep an eye out for that. And, you know, I hope everybody has a happy Thanksgiving, and that you get to do a little riding here in the winter. We do, by the way, have a winter riding class coming up next weekend. It will go over some of the material of this class, but not all of it. And we have sometime in December a holiday version of our bike buyer's guide class in case you are thinking about buying a new bike. That's it. And everybody have a nice evening.